This is a watch that costs $2 million. And despite that, the first thing most people say when they see it is that it looks like a Happy Meal toy, a translucent G-Shock, cheap plastic from a vending machine. They're not entirely wrong about what they're seeing. The case is clear. You can see straight through it. The only thing that can cut it is a diamond-tipped tool. That case took 40 days of continuous, uninterrupted machining to produce. 24 hours a day. If it cracks at any point during those 40 days, they start over. Only 10 of these watches exist in the world. And the brand that made it was 24 years old when Richemont, the group that owns Cartier, paid $6 billion to acquire it. 9 times what they paid for a Swiss manufacturer that had existed since 1868. So the question was never whether this watch looks expensive. The question is what exactly you are paying $2 million for. In the 1960s, Switzerland controlled over half the global watch market. Seiko introduced the world's first commercial quartz watch. It kept better time than any mechanical movement ever built at a fraction of the price. The industry had survived the quartz crisis of the 1970s and early 1980s, which had reduced Swiss watch employment from 90,000 workers to roughly 28,000 and eliminated more than 1,000 companies. The survival strategy, engineered principally by Nicolas Hayek, a management consultant hired by Swiss banks to liquidate the wreckage, proposed something different. He merged the two largest failing groups, ASUAG and SSIH, into Société de Microélectronique et d'Horlogerie in 1983 and launched Swatch, plastic, cheap quartz, aggressively marketed as a fashion accessory to generate cash. That cash kept the mechanical houses above it alive long enough to answer one question. If a mechanical watch could no longer justify its price through accuracy, what could it justify its price through? The answer was history. A mechanical watch was no longer a timekeeping instrument. It was an artifact, proof of craft, something made by a man who had spent 30 years learning how to build it. That idea had become extraordinarily valuable. By the late 1990s, that strategy was working. Rolex was approaching $2 billion in annual revenue. Patek Philippe had launched its Generations advertising campaign in 1996, repositioning its watches as multi-generational assets rather than consumer products. Audemars Piguet's Royal Oak, which had nearly killed the company when it launched in 1972 at 3,300 Swiss francs for a steel watch, was beginning its long ascent toward the six-figure secondary market prices it commands today. In 1999, a Patek Philippe Henry Graves super complication sold at Sotheby's Geneva for $11 million, not because of what it could do, but because of the story attached to it. Richard Mille had spent 27 years watching that system operate from the inside. Export manager at Finhor in 1974. Export director across Matra's watch brands from 1981. General manager of Maubussin's watch division from 1992. He had never designed a movement or sat at a watchmaker's bench. What he understood with a precision his competitors would spend the next decade failing to replicate was that the entire pricing architecture of Swiss luxury watchmaking rested on one variable, the story. And a story, unlike a manufacturer founded in 1839, could be built from scratch. In 1999, he sat down with Dominique Guénat, owner of Guénat SA Montrez Valgine in Les Breleux, Switzerland, and began building one. Their first watch was the RM001 Tourbillon, launched at Basel World in 2001, retail price 120,000 Swiss francs, and it sold almost nothing. The movement inside the first Richard Mille was built by Renault and Papy in Le Sentier, the same manufacturer that supplied complications to Audemars Piguet. The case was titanium. The engineering was credible. None of that was the issue. The issue was that 120,000 Swiss francs requires a narrative, and in 2001, Richard Mille had 11 months of history to sell against brands with 160 years. Authorized dealers in Paris and Geneva reported minimal demand. The watch press covered the launch with curiosity but not conviction. The market had no framework to justify the price, not because the watch was unworthy of it, but because the only framework the market recognized was heritage, and heritage was the one thing the brand could not manufacture in a workshop. In 2004, Richard Mille launched the RM006 in collaboration with Felipe Massa, the Brazilian Formula One driver. The watch weighed 36 grams, including the strap. The case was constructed from carbon nanotubes, Richard Mille published specific engineering data. The watch had survived the vibration, heat, and acceleration forces of professional racing, conditions that would destroy a conventional mechanical movement within laps. A Patek Philippe worn by a banker at a Geneva gala was a status signal directed at people who attended Geneva galas. A watch worn by a Formula One driver through 6 G-forces of wrist acceleration during gear changes was a performance claim directed at a global television audience of 400 million, an audience that had never read a horological publication and had no reason to care about founding dates. Heritage justified price through what a brand had done in the past. The Massa partnership justified price through what the watch was doing right now, every race weekend, in front of cameras that no heritage manufacturer could buy their way onto. When Massa joined Ferrari in 2006, that audience expanded again. The watch appeared in onboard camera footage during Grand Prix. The engineering claims attached to it, weight, material, survival under racing conditions, reached viewers who had never read a horological publication and had no interest in doing so. The story Richard Mille was building was not directed at collectors. It was directed at everyone who watched Formula One. In 2008, the brand formalized a partnership with Rafael Nadal. 2 years later, Nadal wore a RM027 at Roland Garros. The watch survived the physical demands of professional tennis. Richard Mille published performance data claiming wrist acceleration during a Nadal forehand exceeded 1000 G at impact. Whether those figures were measured under conditions directly comparable to a wrist-worn watch is a question the brand has never been required to answer publicly. What mattered commercially was that the claim was specific. It was attached to the most recognized tennis player on Earth, and it appeared on the wrist of a man winning Grand Slams in front of 200 million viewers. By 2012, revenue had reached approximately $200 million. The brand had 15 points of sale globally. Each boutique was allocated fewer watches than its customers requested. Production remained at roughly 5,000 units per year across the entire range, a figure the brand held deliberately. Where a Rolex Submariner carried an authorized dealer waitlist measured in months, the equivalent Richard Mille reference carried a waitlist measured in years. The secondary market confirmed that the constraint was working. By 2018, references were trading on the gray market at premiums of 30 to 80% above retail. A watch with a retail price of $150,000 was changing hands privately for $200,000 to $220,000. The premium was functioning as a live valuation signal, telling every prospective buyer that the retail price was already a discount. The athlete contracts and the scarcity model were not separate strategies. They were the same strategy operating at different ends of the pricing architecture. The contracts manufactured the narrative. The restricted supply ensured the narrative could not be diluted by volume. In 2013, that architecture produced a specific engineering consequence. The RM2701, developed to survive the documented physical demands of professional tennis, introduced a cable suspension system that held the movement inside the case on a single braided cable, 0.35 millimeters thick, running through 10 pulleys. The movement floated. It was isolated from shock rather than reinforced against it. The system was rated to 5,000 G. 1 year later, Richard Mille applied that architecture to a different problem entirely. A watch whose case was made not from titanium or carbon, but from a material that takes 40 days of continuous machining to shape, and that most people, on first sight, mistake it for plastic. When the Sapphire Tourbillon launched at Watches and Wonders in Hong Kong in 2014, its retail price was $2,020,000. The debate that followed focused entirely on the sapphire case looking like plastic and whether it justified the 7 figures. It did not ask how a brand founded in 2001 had built a price floor that made $2 million a credible opening bid. Stettler AG in Lis, Switzerland, spent 40 days of continuous 24-hour machining to produce a single sapphire case, followed by 400 hours of additional work to finish the movement bridges in the same material. 1,400 hours of sapphire work before a single component of the movement was assembled. The cable suspension system inside, a single braided cable of 0.35 millimeters thickness running through 10 pulleys, holding the entire movement floating inside the case, was borrowed directly from the RM2701. The watch built for Nadal to survive the documented forces of professional tennis. The manufacturing complexity was real, the materials cost was real. None of that set the price. In 2012, 2 years before the sapphire tourbillon existed, Richard Mille gave an interview to Europa Star. The interviewer asked whether it was important for his athletes to wear the watches during competition. His answer was direct. "It's compulsory. I will not sign a contract with the athlete unless they wear the watch." The requirement was that the watch be worn on the wrist during competition, not in advertising, not at events, but under the physical conditions of professional sport, in front of cameras pointed at the most watched sporting events on Earth. That clause is what separated every Richard Mille partnership from every other watch sponsorship in the industry. Rolex sponsors Wimbledon and its logo appears on the scoreboard. Tag Heuer's branding wraps the Formula One pit lane. Richard Mille put the watch on the wrist of the athlete and required it to stay there through the forehand, through the gear change, through every condition that would destroy a conventional movement, and the result was visible to anyone watching. When Rafael Nadal refused to wear a watch during competition, his position when Richard Mille first approached him in 2008, the compulsory clause did not allow for a conventional endorsement deal. It forced a different outcome entirely. The brief that followed had 4 requirements: lightness, shock resistance, comfort, and no mechanical compromise. A tourbillon was required. The watch had to be built for the court, or the contract had no basis. 2 years of development produced the RM027, less than 20 grams, including the strap, the lightest tourbillon ever made at the time. The RM2701 followed in 2013, reducing the weight further and introducing the cable suspension architecture. The sapphire tourbillon followed in 2014, borrowing that architecture and enclosing it inside a case that required 40 days to machine. Each watch was an engineering consequence of a contractual obligation. The irony is that the $2 million price has no mechanical explanation. Every luxury watch brand applies identical pricing logic. Narrative justifies a number that manufacturing cost alone cannot reach. Patek Philippe has been applying that logic since 1839, and the passage of 180 years converted it into something the market calls heritage. Richard Mille applied the same logic from 2004 onward. The mechanism was different. Compulsory competition appearances in place of founding dates, but the architecture was identical. In 2022, 1.3 billion Swiss francs in revenue across approximately 5,400 watches, an average of 240,000 Swiss francs per watch. The 6th largest Swiss watch brand by revenue on Earth, founded 21 years prior. Patek Philippe, founded 162 years earlier, generated 1.53 billion Swiss francs the same year. The gap between those two revenue figures is 180 years of heritage. It is also 230 million Swiss francs. By 2022, the athlete network comprised more than 40 partners across Formula One, tennis, golf, and athletics. Every contract contained the same clause. The narrative was no longer dependent on any single athlete or any single podium. It had become self-sustaining, a pricing architecture that generated 240,000 Swiss francs per watch on average, across a range that started at $80,000 and reached $2 million, without requiring a single year of founding history to justify any of it. Richard Mille sold a majority stake to Richemont in 2023 for approximately 6 billion Swiss francs. Richemont already owned Cartier, IWC, Jaeger-LeCoultre, and Vacheron Constantin. When it acquired IWC Schaffhausen in 2000, a manufacturer founded in 1868, it paid 700 million Swiss francs. Richard Mille, at 22 years old, was valued at nearly 9 times that figure. The question embedded in that valuation was whether the architecture could survive without the man who built it, and the answer was already visible in what he left behind. More than 40 athlete contracts, each containing the same clause, each adding a chapter to a founding myth that required no archive and no history to sustain. The RM001 Tourbillon, the first watch, the one that sold almost nothing at 120,000 Swiss francs in 2001, trades today on the secondary market for approximately $2.4 million, 17 times its original retail price. Richard Mille's founding myth was never about watchmaking. It was about who was wearing the watch when the cameras were pointed at them. That decision, made in a small Geneva office in 2001 with no heritage and a borrowed movement, is the reason a watch that costs 100,000 Swiss francs to build sells for $2 million today, and why every watch brand that has tried to replicate the model has discovered that the athlete contracts are the easy part. The hard part is being first. Richard Mille was first. In the luxury watch industry, that is worth exactly 6 billion. If Richard Mille had launched in 2010 instead of 2001, do you think the same pricing architecture would have worked? Or had the window already closed by then? Let us know in the comments. This is the first in a series on how the luxury watch industry costs what they cost. The next video follows the money behind a brand that built a $500 million business in 8 years and then sold it to the same group that owns Louis Vuitton. Stick around and I'll see you on my next video.